Hello, everyone. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening.
Yeah, how are you?
Well, I'm fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. Okay. So basically, we are having our discussion for World Braille Day to commemorate the day today, which happens to fall on the 4th of January.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, just to introduce ourselves, I'll go. So for tonight, I'm the moderator representing the Explorers Club, and my name is Jason Anthony. Yeah. So Emmanuel, you could go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
All right. Good evening to everyone. Happy New Year once again. My name is Emmanuel Taylor. I'm a disability rights activist, and I work as um an ABA therapist, a behavior therapist for children living with autism.
Okay, that's great. It's good to have you tonight, Emmanuel.
Yeah. And thanks for the opportunity. Yeah. Thank you.
You're most welcome. Okay, Leslie. Leslie, if you could hear us, we would love to hear from you. Hello, Leslie, can you hear us? Okay, I think Leslie is having a bit of difficulty in hearing us or speaking to us. But then I'll briefly introduce what today is about, and then once he's able to speak, we would go ahead and continue.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically, World Braille Day is just to honor the system that the visually impaired use in order to read, write, and then what have you. So, I think this was instituted a few years back by the United Nations, and I personally feel it's a great way to include everyone because now we live in a system where we are trying to have an all-inclusive global village, and I personally think it's a good thing that the UN decided to institute this day. So basically, for us as the Explorers Club, we are a youth-led organization that is aimed towards helping attain the sustainable development goals. So even though we are mainly geared towards um, sustainable tourism, we thought it wise to actually help others know about what the sustainable development goals are and then try to hold discussions centered around some of the United Nations instituted days to also help bring awareness to people as well. We started with this discussion last year, and then this
Okay.
year, yes, we just good to have it again this year. But this year, we are having it on the theme assessing Braille literacy in Ghana because personally, I've realized that if you go to a lot of public spaces, there are not materials that enable the visually impaired to actually have a full feel of the environment that they are in, and it tends to make life a bit of comfortable for them, especially in public spaces. So it is my hope that tonight's discussion will help us know more about how the visually impaired live their lives and then know also a bit about the situation of Braille literacy in Ghana, so that the little that we could do as individuals, as organizations, as institutions, and all that we can do to help the visually impaired live in an all-inclusive community. Yes. So I think we'll just go on and start. So Emmanuel, since you are here, could you please give us an overview of the reality of the visually impaired? Since I'm sure there are situations where you've come into contact with them. So if you could give us a bit of the reality or the situation regarding the lives of visually impaired, that would be very helpful. So we start with that.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll begin by trying to explain what visual impairment is, if you don't mind. And visual impairment is actually defined as a functional limitation of the visual system that can, manifest as reduced visual acuity or contrast sensitivity. And, it could result in visual field loss, photophobia, diplophobia, visual distortion, visual perceptual difficulties, or any combination of the above. Okay, and when visual impairment happens, it can significantly interfere with one's ability to function independently as an individual. Okay, and it could lead to blindness because a large number of people with vision impairments are actually blind. Okay, and people living with vision impairments also belong to, they're actually a subset of a larger group, and this larger group is people living with disabilities. Okay, and the people living with disabilities have been living in oppression. They've lived in oppression in the past, and they continue to live they continue to be oppressed. And I quite remember in 2013, something happened that actually caught my interest. The president appointed Dr. Safety Dana as the Minister for Chieftaincy and Culture, and it sparked a lot of controversy across different platforms in the country, and it makes you, or it's paints a clear picture of the situation in the country. Even though um, there's the persons with disability law that was passed in 2006, which mandates the social work, or social services, to modify the environment without necessarily changing the physical space. Okay, to put certain things into place. Like access to public transit and buildings, curb cuts for people, wheelchair users, and then all of these signs to tactile curbs, all of these things to enable people who have disabilities, including people living with blindness, or people living with visual impairments, to be able to also function independently as members of the society. But you realize that even though the law has been passed since 2006, you hardly find any of these things in our environment, as you stated in your introduction. So there are a lot of policies, there are a lot of documents, there's a lot of literature that a lot of research has been conducted, a lot of studies, a lot of surveys have been conducted, and to assess the situation. And even though it looks promising, I have worked with people living with disabilities for quite some time now, and even though it looks promising, even though a lot of things have changed over the past few years, the situation still needs a lot of improvements. Okay, a lot of things need to be done, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited this program is being hosted today, so that we can also create some sort of awareness and get people's attention on the situation in Ghana. Like, I can speak for Ghana because I live in Ghana. Okay, so there are a lot of policies, a lot of literature, a lot of surveys, a lot of things, and a lot of disabled people's groups. There's a Ghana Blind Union, there's a Ghana Disability like these groups are around. They are also advocating. We are all advocating. A lot of disability advocates around, but the situation still needs um it needs attention. There's a lot that needs to be done.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you very much, Emmanuel. So
Yeah.
Leslie, I think Leslie has
Hello.
now. Yeah, hello Leslie, how you doing?
Good. I was on my desktop and talking, and you couldn't hear me. And my
Yeah.
colleague who's listening, Neil Mackenzie, just saved me and told me to get on my phone. So thank you, Neil.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Thank you, Neil. I think thanks for helping Leslie out.
So thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. And I I love teaching Braille, and I believe that Braille should be in the hands of anyone who needs it, anyone who wants to learn. And I just think it's so important that we work together in our world and put Braille in the hands of all of our students, of adults, of anyone who wants to learn, who needs to learn. I think it's so important we work together. And I'm just so glad to work with people from Ghana who are so interested in making Braille accessible to people all over the world. I'm just on board with all of this.
Okay, thank you very much, Leslie. Could you please give us an overview of the situation for the visually impaired in California so that we could also have a pictorial view of what happens with regards to their life in California?
Yeah. You know, we're very fortunate. We are able to find our students and adults, and we have agencies in place to really assess those who may need Braille as a reading medium. And we look at our resources and we're able to provide Braille materials. And part of what's fantastic is that we can share our resources. So if we're working with students, I'm a teacher of the visually impaired, and I have students from age 3 to 22. And if we put together materials electronically, we're able to share those materials with anyone, anywhere. And my colleague Neil Mackenzie, who's on listening right now, has put together amazing graphics for our students, and he puts it out there to share. So we're looking to make those relationships and be able to give materials to people who need them, who want them, and who deserve them.
Okay, that's great. So, if I'm getting you right, it means that Braille is quite accessible for students or for people who are visually impaired in California or in the area that you find yourself.
Yes, there is a shortage of teachers in the US right now, but we really do have the resources to provide Braille to
Okay,
those who are learning Braille
yeah.
in
Emmanuel,
general.
I think that's a vast contrast with regards to the reality here in Ghana.
Yes, yes.
Mm,
Unfortunately,
yeah.
because
Oh,
we have the we like like every other where in the world, we also have the legislative instruments that you know, stipulate that we should have these facilities or make accessible environments, a lot of tools for people with vision impairment. Okay, but unfortunately, it's not like that in the reality. Practically, it's not really there. Because looking at the even with our education system, the world is drifting towards inclusive education here, and
yeah.
we are still struggling to hit the ground running with with implementing inclusive education in our country. So our situation is quite the opposite of what's happening in California. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, and
Well,
I hope that we can work together to make it a level playing field for everyone because
Yes.
equity in education is worldwide. It
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't just be in California. We should work together to help anyone we can. And that is why this dialogue is so important. And I'm so happy to be here because we can share resources and share ideas and help each other. I'm very excited to be talking with you.
Uh, that's
Yeah.
that's great. We hope that for those who would be joining us and listening in, would also come on board and then support and contribute so that we could all make it an inclusive environment for the visually impaired as well. So then moving on, as we are speaking of, especially here in the situation in Ghana, where we realize that materials and then the Braille system is not very accessible for the visually impaired. Per the last article I read some time ago, it stipulated a cost of Braille around 6,000 to 7,000 cities, which is about over $1,000. Emmanuel, would you say that the cost of Braille actually influences the fact that we are not able to include it with regards to having them in open spaces because organizations and people feel that it's too expensive for them to keep up.
Well, I think the main problem is um, inclusion. I think that's what's actually hindering access to braille facilities because we can't really give a lot of excuses because there's technology now. There's a lot of things that are coming up that are supporting people with visual impairments. Okay, and I'm just trying to think about the situation where we live like our education is an all-inclusive system where we have children who have visual impairments in the same classroom, like in our mainstream classrooms, okay, all across the country, like in every mainstream school. I think currently we run a parallel system of education. There's special schools, the school for the blind, and they are somewhere in the outskirts, and then we have our mainstream schools for atypical or atypically developing children. And I think that's the problem because if we're able to embrace and fully accept inclusion, I think the larger the million, like it moves from being in a minority and being a problem for a particular group of people. Okay, if it's across board, I'm sure we would have a lot of. Because I could say for a fact that today is World Braille Day, but it's not really getting the traction in Ghana here. It's everywhere internationally, but you could just meet the average person on the street and he doesn't know what's happening today. He doesn't know it's Braille Day, and it's quite unfortunate because we have quite a number of visually impaired people amongst us. You travel the streets of Kumasi, of Accra, Takrade, you find these people on our streets, begging for alms. So even though they're in the minority, their numbers are, increasing because according to the World Disability Report, more than 1 billion human beings live with some form of disability, and we cannot ignore such a huge number. Okay, we are about 7 to 8 billion in the world, and like more than 1 billion people live with some form of disability. So I believe the way forward is inclusion. If we are able to accept inclusion, have children who have vision impairment, who are visually impaired, move from segregated institutions. Okay, they are no more institutionalized, but rather they are accepted in our mainstream schools. Then the conversation about Braille would come to it would be a different conversation. It would come to a broader perspective. We can all look at it from a different aspect because as it stands now, it seems to be a problem for just people who are blind. Okay, like just it's just on one side. So that's what I believe. Okay. So let's not dwell so much on the price, okay? Because now there's technology, there's a lot of things coming up. But I also believe if we're able to push for inclusivity, like we should fight for this because children who are blind can survive in mainstream schools. We just need to retrofit the schools to suit them. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what I
Okay.
believe.
I
Okay, that's
I agree
yeah.
100%, and I applaud you for taking that stance. And I believe inclusion is a fantastic way to start the conversation of empathy and having other children realize that students can do well in school. With visually impaired students can do anything they set their mind to when given the tools. And it really is changing an attitude. Inclusion can show the accomplishments of our visually impaired students. And I think it's so important as well. I agree.
Okay. Sure. That's great. It's nice to know that we are on the same page. So then it's not just about the course, but then it's about the mindset. So the fact that if we are willing to actually include them, then definitely we would find the technology, we'll find the means to
Mhm. Mhm.
make okay to make it accessible to them, so that in the end we live in an all inclusive
Yes.
environment. Okay, that's great. So
And
our next yes,
oops,
Leslie, you can
I,
go
I
on.
just I just wanted to say that when you do have visually impaired students in your community, the community can help as well. And preparing materials, whatever the case may be, it does take a community to make
Yeah,
this happen. So it's not just in the schools, it's the entire community.
okay. Sure, thank you.
And
So yes,
I'd also add something. And I think in our situation as Ghanaians and as Africans, I believe that disability discrimination is deeply rooted in our culture. Okay, as Ghanaians, it's deeply rooted in our traditions and culture as a people. And I think to shift from where we are, even though there's been massive improvements, but then there's still remnants of this discrimination. Okay, we should advocate more. We should, get the word out there. There should be a lot of education, a lot of advocacy, because as it stands now, when Dr. Seydou Dona was appointed Minister of State, one of the arguments that came up was, you know, um, when you have a disability, you can't become a chief in our traditional society. So
yeah,
why have they made him minister of chieftains and culture and not any other ministry? And these were some of the arguments that were raised. Okay, and it tells you how we see people living with not only visually impaired people, but people living with disabilities in our society. And to bring change, it would the school alone, because people from the community are in the schools. So it should be on a larger scale. Like we should all come together. There should be more education. There should be more advocacy. To try and then get people to unlearn, or get rid of, some of these mindsets and some of these misconceptions and all of these things that um, disabilities are shrouded in our society. So I think that's also one way that we could start the conversation: advocacy, education, talk about it, deconstruct everything, the whole existence of disabilities, because there's a lot of misconceptions about disabilities. There are a lot of funny stories. There's glaucoma, and when you have glaucoma, you could just go blind. You wouldn't There are no signs, you wouldn't even know you have glaucoma. You could just go blind. And our we have these funny stories. We are Africans, and we have our way of seeing things. We have our own perceptions of happenings around us, and sometimes we attribute some of these occurrences to supernatural forces, and it affects the lives of people who are visually impaired and people who live with disabilities as a whole. Okay, so I believe that we can start from um, advocating, educating people, educating communities, and I commend Explorers Club for for having this wonderful event. God bless you guys so much.
sure. Thank you very much, and amen, and God bless you too for joining us to actually spread the message
Yeah.
across. Yeah. So now that we are talking about advocacy, education, changing our mindsets and all, what do we think is the most effective way that we can implement, or some of the effective ways that we could implement and promote accessibility for the visually impaired, especially in our public spaces? Yeah. So Leslie, you could go for us, and then Emmanuel would continue.
Yeah, and I dream of a world where someone with a visual impairment can travel independently, and there is Braille signage, that there are materials in Braille if they go out to eat, that they can have a job where it is accessible and they're able to do their job based on their ability as opposed to their disability. And I think having our communities, having where we live, accept the fact that those with visual impairments really can achieve anything they want to achieve, and changing that mindset. It's a dream, but I think we're moving towards it, and discussions like this are how we get there, working together.
Okay, great. Yeah, Emmanuel.
Yeah, I think I agree with her. But the thing is, for Ghana on paper, everything seems all right because there's the Persons with Disability Act 715, which was passed in 2006. Okay, and this act, it mandates that all people, including people with vision impairments, they're entitled to equal access to public transit and buildings. Okay, there should be auditory signs which will remove functional barriers. Like there should be like auditory signs, like speakers around that would communicate to people who can't see, tell them, okay, pass here, there's this here, there's a billboard here, there's this here, and these are all stipulated in the Persons with Disability Act 715. Okay, so on paper it's beautiful. Our
Right.
problem has been with the implementation. Okay, because the act, says a lot of nice things. Tactile ground service indicators, white canes, dogs, all of these things to help. The walking surface, our roads, but we don't even have good roads. Okay, let alone have
Yeah.
these tactile surfaces and tactile grounds to tell people who can't see that, okay, there's a high, or there's this here, there's a double row, there's this, there's that. Okay, so our problem has been with the implementation. That's what I believe, because we are almost present at the party. We are UN member states. We sign every document, everything. This was passed, this was done, this is done. There's this act, there's this convention, there's that. We are always part, we are always signatory. In fact, we are signatories to all of these policies and documents which have been put forward by the United Nations. Okay, but our problem has always been with the implementation. That's always been our problem, because
Yeah.
there's almost a policy for every group of people living with disabilities in Ghana. There's
Mhm.
an act for inclusive education. It was passed in 2015. There's an act for this. There's an act for this. There's an act for this. There's a policy for this. But always when you go to the grounds, it's there's nothing there. Okay, so our problem has always been, and it's implementation. How do we take what is on paper and then transfer it or translate it to the grounds, like make it happen? Our problem
Yeah.
has always been making things happen, implementing these policies.
Yes. And, we struggle with that in the United States as well. And not to the degree that Ghana does, but it's really, we're still convincing people of what can happen. And for me, I feel like showing people what our students can do by having them be placed in jobs where they can succeed, having them be a part of our communities where they're artists, where they're presenting their abilities and showing communities, showing the country that they can achieve, and that if you do implement the policies, that there will be independence, that there will be success. And that is the $1 million question, isn't it? How do we
Yeah.
implement the policies? But again, I think working together, now that the world has become smaller through technology, sharing ideas, what has worked, what we can do to improve, and really reaching out and helping each other.
Yes. Yeah, but I think I would agree also that as you said, there are a lot of policies. I mean, year in, year out, there's almost a new policy. But then our problem has always been the implementation. And sometimes it's sad that we are able to actually put it on paper, but then translated it into action is something that tends to retrogress development, and then it actually puts the lives of these individuals at risk, because you realize that at the end of the day, these are people that would also have potential to contribute to society's development, but then because they are left out one way or the other, they are not able to feel that they are part of society, and then at the end, they just have a life that is in a corner somewhere, and they are unable to contribute to the world's development. So I hope that going forward, just as we are advocates, and we are also helping to spread awareness, we can also spread awareness from the bottom through to the top, so that at the end of the day, these things that we have put on paper can end up being put in action one day, hopefully, so that we have an all inclusive community. So then, lastly,
Jason,
yes,
there's one thing I'd want to add.
yes,
The thing with having a or acquiring a disability is disability is it's part of the human condition, okay? And there's a fine line between being able-bodied and then acquiring a disability. Because I am friends with people who are not born with any vision like visual impairments, and they are in their late 20s and they've acquired blindness. They are blind, so that's how it is. So we can't just ignore, okay, just because we don't have any significant disability, so it's not a problem. I think it's incumbent on all of us, to push the agenda, to create awareness, to also make changes wherever we find ourselves, okay? Because some of us could be entrepreneurs, some of us could be putting up buildings, some of us could, be, have certain positions in our society, and the change could also start from us. It could start from us in our workplaces, in our communities, because we can't just ignore this. It's part of the human condition. If it doesn't happen to you, it could happen to your neighbor, your colleague, or I'm not saying it's, but as the demographics have changed. Diseases that killed us say 50 years, 100 years ago, they don't kill us anymore, but then we are living longer, and we are acquiring disabilities now. So we should create an environment that would be disability friendly, because to a large extent the disability does not even dwell with the individual. It's within the society, okay? If I'm blind and my environment is accessible, is disability friendly, I can move about without fear of being knocked by a car. I wouldn't have to be dependent on members of my society, okay?
yes.
So I think there's more reason why we should all push the agenda. We should all be disability rights activists, like anyone at all should speak for the rights of people with disabilities, because the oppression they live in is, it's a human rights tragedy of epic proportions. So it's very important that we all take note of this fact.
Okay, sure.
I
Thank
agree.
you.
Well said.
Yes, yes. So I think then all these ways that we are mentioning are also ways that we can also help support Braille literacy. So as Emmanuel said, it's not just about doing things on a large scale, but then also where we find ourselves in our various communities in putting up our buildings, in our office spaces, and then homes, and then any other place that we could find ourselves where we could make the visually impaired and then people living with disability feel welcome. Because there's something that you said before, and then it's very true that the fact that here in Ghana, once you have a disability, people see you as not to be part of society, or you are cursed or one way
Mm-hmm.
or the other. Yes, without trying to understand your story fully, because sometimes it could be due to biological reasons, other times it could be to an accident or something of that sort that happened. But then, because people are not so welcoming with those living with disability and then the visually impaired, it makes it difficult for them to understand what really goes on in the lives of these people. So I think at this juncture we could take questions. So if you have questions from our listeners, we could take questions, and then we would have our panelists answer them. We don't have any questions. But then, if there are any thing you'd want to add or contribute, Emmanuel and Leslie, the floor is still open. You can still go ahead, and then if there are
Yeah.
any facts you'd want to share with us, or any stories or anything like that, you can still go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to share while I was teaching this morning, I asked my student, was there anything that you wanted to say to the
Hmm.
people of Ghana? He's
Yeah.
and his message was, I'm going to read it to you,
Okay.
is reading will help you learn about anything you want to know. And
Wow.
that's coming from an 11-year-old. And
Wow.
he knows he's not a Braille reader, he's visually impaired, but the importance of Braille literacy we should spread the word and
Yeah.
do what we can to put Braille in the hands of our visually impaired students and those who have lost their sight as adults, because it can lead to independence. And we want to show the world that visual impairment is not going to stop anyone. If they're given the tools to learn, really anything can be achieved. And we're here to be allies and to support them in that journey.
Okay, that's great, Leslie. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. We are grateful that he was thoughtful to tell us to read, because reading, it's a good thing. It helps to broaden our scope. So definitely, we'll take his word into action and then do that. We are very grateful for that piece of advice. So, Emmanuel, is there anything you would want to add?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great submission, and Braille is just like it's just like English language. Okay, it's just these dots, and they can be written. Like the alphabets. You learn them, you use them to write. You feel them tactily. So I think that inclusion. I'm like 100% behind inclusion. Okay, we have to teach children living with disabilities, children who are blind, children with visual impairments, like how to write. We can't just leave them out, okay? And we should start with, altering our attitudes as people living in communities, because there are a lot of people, or a lot of parents who keep their children, their blind children, in rooms. They keep them in homes. They are shy. They are afraid to be, for them to be ostracized in the society. So we should start by altering our attitudes, because our attitudes alone is one huge obstacle for it's like maybe Mount Everest in front of a lot of people living with disabilities in our country. Okay, so if we are able to change our attitudes, okay, adopt a positive attitude towards people who are blind, people who have vision impairments, people with all sorts of disabilities, okay, then we can move towards inclusion. Because if these children are accepted, okay, in mainstream schools, and the schools are changed, they are retrofitted to suit the needs of these children. So okay, there's this school, let's say Ahinsan LA Primary School or something. Okay, it's a mainstream school, but then there are, let's say, 20 blind children in the school. It's the children don't have to adjust to the school. It's the school that has to take into consideration the needs of these children. Okay, these children can see. So what do we do for them? We teach them how to braille. And that's their means of learning how to read or write. Because you go to certain bookshops, there's a Shakespeare book, okay. Then in the same bookshop, this same book has been translated in braille format for people who can't read like you and I can. So they just buy the book, the braille format, and then they feel it, tactile, and then they're able to read. So if this thing happens, okay, then the conversation is getting bigger. So changing our attitudes, inclusion, we need to stand up for the rights of all children. Education is supposed to be for all. Education shouldn't be for people who are able-bodied or people without disabilities, because there are a lot of people in our communities, or people who have contributed throughout history and even now, who have or who had some form of significant disability. And I'm sure you know quite a number of them. I would mention Dr. Seydou Dada, and he became Minister of State, and he was blind. He was a PhD holder, he was a lawyer. There's Stevie Wonder, he's a musician. There's even a Ghanaian singer. I don't know her name, but I've heard of someone like that who sings in Ghana, and she's blind. There are a lot of people, okay, and they all have something that they can contribute to our society. So if we don't adjust our society to accommodate them, we are missing out as a society. Can you imagine the world without Stevie Wonder? Look at his contribution, okay, his songs, okay, what he's contributed to our society. So if we can change our attitudes, no discrimination, accept them. There's nothing wrong with nobody. Usually, this disability is not desirable. Okay, no one, if given the chance, would pick or would choose to be disabled, or would choose to live with a disability. Okay, so if it happens to somebody, the worst thing you can do as an individual is to discriminate or ostracize them. Okay, and I'm not asking, or I'm not advocating for people to um, have pity, or or sympathize with them, but we should have empathy. We should feel their pain. We should understand them. We should put ourselves in their shoes. Okay, and there should be equity. Okay, we should think about these children, what they can do, because there's technology. I've met people at the University of Ghana, Legon, a lecturer, Mr. Alex Bankole Williams. I'll mention his name, and he's a lecturer. He's blind, okay, and he was an amazing person. He's living a wonderful life. He has a wonderful family, and there are millions of others like them. One of my very good friends, a lady, she's blind. She lives her life. She used to work in the office of the president and next. She's an amazing person. She does everything by herself. She's having a wonderful life. Okay, so it's up to us, society. And I'll always say this. Disability, to a large extent, does not rest with the individual. It's with the larger society. How do we create, or how do we build an accessible society? Okay, how would a blind person walk in the streets of Kaswa, walk in the streets of Osu without fearing being knocked down by a car? Okay, there should be all these things. All these things should be put in place. Then we can actually know that we are making progress. Okay, we must also advocate for teachers or students with visual impairments to have the necessary time and resources to provide adequate direct instruction in Braille. For most students, this means daily instructions. Okay, and it would take time. It's teaching in Braille is not like teaching A or B or teaching phonics. It would take more time. So we should also, as a country, our governments, not-for-profit foundations should all, think about these things and also try and invest. Okay, but I think, like I said earlier, we it starts with us. It starts with us individuals. Okay, we are young people. We are the youth, and we are the future. So we can start by rekindling a splint. Lighting up the torch. And I'm sure 10 years from now, the story will be different. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I think I agree with you very much, and then I must say I do admire the passion that both of you have spoken with tonight, because it shows that we still have people in society that care about making the world that we live in an all-inclusive one. So I think we don't have any questions from our listeners. So then, since there are no questions, I'd like to thank Leslie and Emmanuel for joining us on this discussion. It is my hope that in the nearest future, maybe we could embark on a project together that is aimed at the helping the visually impaired, and then
That'd
people
be
living.
great.
That would
Yes.
be amazing. I would love to share resources, and please reach out to me if I can do anything to help. I'm an ally to the visually impaired. I want to help. That is my life mission, and there's
Yeah.
others like me out there, and we want to help. We want to make our world a better place for those with disabilities and highlight achievement and stay positive.
That would be very great. We would definitely reach out to you. Maybe we can come up with a joint project or something, and then we could implement and then have that out and then spread the word and awareness with regards to helping the visually impaired, and then making the community that we live in an all-inclusive one. So thank you very much for joining us, and then we would keep in touch, and then I hope everyone has a wonderful year 2022.
Yeah. Thank you so much for hosting this wonderful event. Like, I'm glad. Okay. Thank you so much.
No, you're most welcome. You're very much welcome.
I'm
Okay
Thank
honored.
then.
you
I'm honored
very
to be a
much.
part of this.
Thank you. We are honored to have you too. So then, have a very good evening and a good day to everyone. Leslie, I would reach out to you and then Emmanuel as well. Then we'll know the way forward with regards to advocacy for people living with disability and then the visually impaired.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
I'm so glad to have met you all.
Bye.
I'm
yeah. Thank
very
you. All right.
happy.
So,
Thank you.
all right. Bye bye then.